Nora Miller stared at the 3 fresh graves on the hillside, clutching her worn shawl around her shoulders as the autumn wind whipped across the Montana prairie. The year was 1879, and winter was coming too fast for a widow with 3 hungry children and not a penny to her name. "Mama!" 6-year-old Emma tugged at Nora's skirt, her small face pinched with hunger. "When are we going home?" Nora knelt down, drawing her daughter close. "Soon, sweetheart." Behind Emma stood 4-year-old James, thumb in his mouth, and little Sarah, barely 2, balanced on Nora's hip. Their father Thomas had been dead barely a week, taken by the same fever that claimed her parents who'd come west with them. 3 graves, 3 deaths, and now 3 children depending solely on her. "Mrs. Miller." The preacher's voice was gentle as he approached. "I wish there was more the town could do, but times are hard for everyone. The church collection." He pressed a small pouch of coins into her hand, his expression apologetic. "Thank you, Reverend," Nora whispered, knowing without counting that it wouldn't last a month. Their homestead was 10 miles outside of Clearwater, the closest town, and with winter approaching, they couldn't stay there alone. But where would they go? The sparse crowd of mourners had already dispersed, hurrying back to their own concerns. Nora stood alone with her children on the windswept hill, the vast Montana sky stretching endlessly above them. "Madam," a deep voice startled her. "Your wagon's ready." She turned to find a tall man standing a respectful distance away, hat in hand. Nora recognized him vaguely. Samuel Reed, a rancher whose property bordered the far edge of what had been their homestead. Though they'd been neighbors for nearly 2 years, she'd only seen him in passing, usually in town. Thomas had mentioned him a few times, describing him as a hard worker but a loner who kept to himself. "Thank you, Mr. Reed," she said, summoning what dignity she could. "We appreciate the ride back." He nodded, his eyes a striking blue that contrasted with his sun-darkened skin, briefly meeting hers before looking at the children. "Got some blankets in the wagon. Weather's turning." As he helped them into the wagon, Nora noticed the careful way he lifted each child, speaking quietly to Emma, who stared back at him with solemn eyes. He was younger than she'd thought, probably around 30, though the weather and hard work had carved lines around his eyes and mouth. His dark hair was cut short, and his beard was neatly trimmed, unlike many of the men in these parts. The ride back to their homestead was quiet save for little Sarah's occasional whimpers. Nora stared at the passing landscape, the golden grasses of autumn bending in the wind, wondering how she would survive the coming months. Their crops had been poor this year, and Thomas had been too sick to properly prepare for winter. "Mr. Reed," she finally said, breaking the silence, "do you know of anyone in town looking for help? I can cook, clean, so." He glanced at her, then back at the trail. "Not many can afford help these days." After a pause, he added, "How are your supplies?" Nora swallowed hard. "We'll manage." It was a lie, and from his sidelong glance, she suspected he knew it. "Winter comes hard here," he said simply. "I'm aware," she replied, a touch of defensiveness in her voice. "We've been through 2 already. With your husband." It wasn't a question. Nora fell silent, her throat tight. "Yes, with Thomas." Strong, determined Thomas, who had convinced her to leave Philadelphia for the promise of land and a fresh start. Thomas, who had built their cabin with his own hands, who had held her through the first bitter winter when she'd cried from homesickness. Thomas, who would never hold her again. As they approached the small cabin, Nora felt a wave of despair. The place looked forlorn already, with the garden withered and the woodpile dangerously low. How could she possibly chop enough wood, hunt enough game, keep her children fed and warm through the months ahead? Samuel Reed pulled the wagon to a stop and helped them down. As Emma and James ran toward the cabin, he cleared his throat. "Mrs. Miller, I don't mean to overstep, but I'd like to help if you'll allow it. Nora stiffened. She'd already received too many pitying looks in town. We'll be fine, Mr. Reed. His expression didn't change. I've got a crew coming to harvest the last of my hay tomorrow. I could send a couple of the men over to chop wood for you, bring some supplies. I can't pay them, she said, the words bitter in her mouth. Wasn't asking for payment. He settled his hat back on his head. Just being neighborly. Before she could respond, Emma came running back. Mama, there's a mouse in the cupboard. Samuel's mouth twitched slightly. I can help with that too, if you'd like. Despite herself, Nora felt a smile threatening. I suppose we could use some help with the mouse. That evening, after Samuel had dispatched the mouse, checked the cabin's chinking for gaps where the winter wind might enter, and promised to return the next day with his men, Nora sat by the fire watching her children sleep. For the first time since Thomas fell ill, she allowed herself to cry quietly, the weight of her fear and uncertainty washing over her. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Nora had just finished making a thin porridge for breakfast when she heard horses approaching. She stepped outside to find Samuel Reed with 3 other men, their horses loaded with tools and supplies. Mrs. Miller, Samuel nodded. Hope we're not too early. Not at all, she said, surprised by the extent of help he'd brought. I've coffee on, if you'd like some before you start. As the men worked chopping wood, patching the roof, and fixing a broken window, Nora found herself watching Samuel. He worked alongside his men, not above the labor, and she noticed how he took time to show James how to safely stack wood, the boy trailing after him like a shadow. At midday, she called them in for the stew she'd prepared, stretching the last of their venison with potatoes and carrots. It wasn't much, but it was the least she could do. Mrs. Miller, Samuel said as they ate, I've been thinking. My ranch is only an hour's ride from here, and I've got room. It might be easier for you and the children to winter there. Nora stiffened. Mr. Reed, while I appreciate your help today, I couldn't possibly, just until spring, he added quickly. The bunkhouse is empty since I let most of my hands go for the winter. You'd have privacy. And there's plenty of food. I'm not looking for charity, she said, her pride stinging. His blue eyes met hers directly. It's not charity I'm offering. I could use help around the ranch house. Cooking mainly. My housekeeper left to care for her daughter in Billings. Nora hesitated. It was a reasonable offer, a fair exchange of labor for shelter and food. But still. I don't know you, Mr. Reed, she said finally. He nodded, understanding in his expression. Ask around town about me if you need to. I've been in these parts 8 years now. He stood, placing his hat back on. Think on it. Offer stands. After they left, Nora checked the woodpile enough for a month, maybe more if she was careful. They'd stocked her pantry too, with flour, beans, salt pork, and coffee. But would it be enough? That night, as a cold rain began to fall, little Sarah developed a cough. By morning, the child was burning with fever. Nora spent 3 terrified days nursing her youngest, using the last of their medicine, praying the fever wouldn't take another family member. On the 4th day, when Sarah's fever finally broke, Nora made her decision. When Samuel Reed returned as promised to check on them, she was ready. Your offer, she said without preamble as he dismounted. Is it still open? His expression softened as he took in her exhausted face. Yes, madam, it is. Then we accept. With conditions. Nora straightened her shoulders. I'll cook and clean in exchange for room and board. But I want to be clear, this is a business arrangement. Samuel nodded solemnly. Of course. He glanced at the children, Emma helping James with his boots while Sarah slept in her makeshift crib. We can leave whenever you're ready. 2 days later, Nora Miller and her 3 children arrived at the Reed Ranch. It was larger than she'd expected, a substantial main house built of sturdy logs with glass windows, a large barn, several outbuildings, and a bunkhouse just as Samuel had described. A creek ran nearby, and the property was nestled against foothills that provided some shelter from the worst of the wind. "It's not fancy," Samuel said as he helped her down from the wagon. "But it's solid. It's lovely," Nora admitted. In truth, it was far more impressive than their own small homestead. The inside of the main house was simple but comfortable. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, with a solid table and chairs, a sofa, and bookshelves filled with volumes that surprised her. The kitchen was well equipped, with a proper stove and ample storage. "There are 3 bedrooms upstairs," Samuel explained. "You and the children can take 2 of them. Mine's at the end of the hall." Nora hesitated. "Perhaps we should use the bunkhouse as you suggested." "Winter's coming fast," he said, gesturing toward the windows where snow had begun to fall. "Bunkhouse isn't as well insulated. Better for the little ones to be here." She couldn't argue with his logic, though sharing the house with this man, still nearly a stranger, made her uneasy. But as she watched him help Emma and James explore their new surroundings, treating their endless questions with patience, some of her anxiety eased. That night, after a hearty supper that the children devoured with enthusiasm, Samuel sat by the fire reading while Nora tucked the children into bed. When she returned downstairs, he closed his book. "Mrs. Miller," he said quietly, "I want you to know that you and your children are safe here." Nora nodded, her throat suddenly tight. "Thank you, Mr. Reed." "Samuel," he said, "if we're to share a house through winter, perhaps we can use our given names." She hesitated only briefly. "Nora, then." He smiled, and for the first time, she noticed the way it transformed his face, softening the weathered lines and warming his blue eyes. "Good night, Nora." "Good night, Samuel." As the weeks passed, they settled into a routine. Nora cooked and kept the house, while Samuel tended to the ranch's winter needs, caring for the remaining livestock, repairing equipment, and making occasional trips to town for supplies. The children gradually became more comfortable, especially Emma, who followed Samuel around asking endless questions about ranch life, which he answered with surprising patience. One evening in early December, as a blizzard howled outside, Nora found Samuel teaching Emma and James to play checkers by the fire. Sarah sat on his lap, contentedly playing with a wooden horse he had carved for her. "And then you jump my piece," he was explaining to James, who frowned in concentration. "Like this." The boy moved his checker, his face lighting up when Samuel nodded approval. "Exactly right." Something shifted in Nora's chest as she watched them, a warmth she hadn't felt since Thomas died. These past weeks, she'd been so focused on survival that she'd forgotten what it was like to see her children simply being children, playing and laughing without the shadow of hunger and cold. Samuel looked up, catching her gaze. For a moment, something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of the small miracle happening in this warm room while winter raged outside. That night, after the children were asleep, Nora found Samuel still by the fire, a ledger open on his lap. "May I join you?" she asked. He looked up, surprised. Usually, she retired immediately after the children. "Of course." Nora sat in the chair opposite, her hands busy with mending. "I wanted to thank you, Samuel, not just for taking us in, but for being so kind to the children." "They're good kids," he said simply. "Emma's got a quick mind. James too, though he's quieter about it. And Sarah follows you like a shadow," Nora added with a small smile. Samuel's expression softened. "She reminds me of my sister at that age." At Nora's questioning look, he explained, "I had a younger sister. She died of fever when she was 6. I was 12. "I'm sorry," Nora said softly. You never mentioned family before. Not much to tell. Parents died years ago. No brothers or sisters left. He closed his ledger. What about you? Any family back east? Nora shook her head. My parents came west with us. They were our only family. She paused, memories flooding back. My father was a teacher in Philadelphia. He loved the idea of the frontier, though he'd never done physical labor a day in his life. The first winter nearly broke him. And yet you stayed. Thomas believed in this place, she said, her voice low. He had such dreams for our homestead, for the children's future here. He sounds like a good man. He was. Nora's throat tightened. He would have hated leaving the homestead. You could go back in spring, Samuel offered. If that's what you want. Was it what she wanted? Nora wasn't sure anymore. The homestead represented Thomas's dreams, but also the back-breaking work that had worn him down, the isolation that had sometimes left her in tears. I don't know what I want, she admitted, except for my children to be safe and fed. They are, Samuel said quietly, and they will be whatever you decide. Their eyes met across the firelight, and Nora was struck by the conviction in his gaze. She believed him, she realized. In these past weeks, she had come to trust this quiet, steady man who asked for so little and gave so much. As Christmas approached, the children grew excited despite Nora's warnings that there would be few presents. To her surprise, Samuel returned from town one day with a small pine tree strapped to his horse, along with a mysterious sack he refused to let anyone see. Christmas isn't Christmas without a tree, he declared as he set it up in the corner of the main room. That evening, they decorated it with strings of dried berries, paper ornaments the children made, and a few glass baubles Samuel produced from a dusty box. These were my mother's, he explained as he carefully hung them. Haven't had reason to bring them out in years. On Christmas morning, the children woke to find small presents beneath the tree-carved wooden animals for James. A doll with real fabric clothes for Emma, and a soft-knitted rabbit for Sarah. For Nora, there was a beautiful wool shawl in deep blue. Samuel, this is too much, she protested when she unwrapped it. It matches your eyes, he said simply, then looked away as if embarrassed by his own words. Nora felt her cheeks warm. She'd made gifts 2 knitted scarves for the children from yarn Samuel had brought from town, and for him, a new shirt she'd sewn in secret, using fabric from one of her own dresses she'd carefully taken apart and readied. It's not much, she said as he opened it. It's perfect, he replied, running his fingers over the careful stitching. No one's made me clothing since my mother died. That night, after a Christmas feast that was humble by Eastern standards but rich by frontier ones, Samuel brought out a fiddle Nora hadn't known he owned. Do you play? She asked in surprise. Not well, he admitted with a rare grin, but well enough for dancing. He began to play a lively tune, and soon Emma and James were twirling around the room, their laughter filling the house. Even little Sarah clapped her hands and bounced in Nora's lap. When Samuel finished the song, Emma tugged at Nora's skirt. Dance with Mr. Samuel, Mama. Nora shook her head, but Samuel was already setting aside his fiddle. I think that's a fine idea, he said, holding out his hand. May I have this dance, Mrs. Miller? Perhaps it was the magic of Christmas, or the children's expectant faces, or simply the warmth in Samuel's blue eyes, but Nora found herself placing her hand in his. He drew her into a simple waltz, his hands steady at her waist, his steps sure despite the lack of music. Where did a rancher learn to waltz? She asked, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest at his proximity. My mother insisted on some civilizing influences, he replied with a small smile. Said no son of hers would grow up a complete savage. She succeeded admirably. Don't be too sure, he said, his voice dropping lower. I still forget to take my boots off sometimes before coming inside. Nora laughed, surprising herself. When had she last laughed freely? The children joined in their dance, Emma taking James's hands and mimicking their steps while Sarah toddled between them. For a moment, just a moment, they felt like a family. The thought startled Nora so much that she missed a step, bumping against Samuel's chest. His arm tightened slightly, steadying her. "All right?" he asked. "Yes," she said quickly. "Just tired." He released her immediately, stepping back. "Of course, it's been a long day." Later, as Nora lay in bed listening to the winter wind, she tried to make sense of her conflicted feelings. Thomas had been gone barely 3 months. It felt disloyal to even think of another man, especially one so different from her late husband. Thomas had been all fire and dreams, full of grand plans and passionate ideals. Samuel was earth and steadiness, a man of few words but consistent actions. And yet, there was something about the way he looked at her, the way he treated her children, that made her wonder what it might be like to build a life here with him. January brought the harshest weather Nora had experienced since coming west. For nearly 2 weeks, they were completely snowed in, the world beyond the windows a blinding white. The forced proximity might have been uncomfortable, but Samuel seemed to have a knack for giving her space when she needed it, disappearing to the barn or his room for hours at a time. With the children, however, he was increasingly present. He taught James to whittle, showed Emma the basics of reading maps, and spent hours patiently building block towers for Sarah to knock down. One stormy afternoon, Nora came in from the kitchen to find all 3 children curled against him on the sofa as he read to them from one of his books. And so the brave knight rescued the princess and they returned to his kingdom, where they lived happily ever after. He was saying, his deep voice gentle. "Another one," Emma demanded. "Please, Mr. Samuel," James added more politely. "One more. Then it's time to help your mother with supper," Samuel agreed, glancing up to find Nora watching them. Something in his expression made her heart skip, uncertainty, perhaps, or a question he didn't voice. That night, after the children were asleep and the house quiet save for the crackling fire, Nora finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "Why did you never marry, Samuel?" He looked up from his book, surprised. "Never found the right woman, I suppose." "You never looked?" A shadow crossed his face. "There was someone years ago. Didn't work out." "I'm sorry," Nora said softly. He shrugged. "It was for the best. She wanted city life, fine things. I wanted." He gestured around him. "This, land, space. And you never regretted it? Being alone?" Samuel's blue eyes met hers steadily. "Sometimes, especially in winter." After a pause, he added, "What about you? How did you meet your husband?" Nora smiled at the memory. "Thomas came to teach at the school where my father worked. He was full of stories about the West, about the opportunities here. He made it sound like paradise. And when you arrived, it was an adjustment," she admitted. "That first year was so hard. I'd never been so cold, so hungry, so tired." Thomas was determined to make it work, though. "He never gave up, even when I wanted to." "He sounds like a brave man." He was. Nora twisted her wedding ring, a simple gold band now loose on her finger after months of hardship. "I miss him." "Of course you do," Samuel said gently. "You always will." Something in his tone made her look up. He was watching her with such understanding, such compassion, that tears pricked at her eyes. "I'm afraid," she confessed suddenly. "Afraid I can't do this alone. Afraid I'll fail them." She didn't need to specify who them was. "You're not alone, Nora," Samuel said, his voice low and certain. "Not as long as I'm here." The sincerity in his words wrapped around her like a blanket, and for the first time since Thomas's death, Nora felt the crushing weight of responsibility lighten, just a little. February brought a brief thaw, enough for Samuel to make a trip to town for supplies and mail. He returned with letters for Nora from Thomas's aunt in Iowa, who wrote that she was sorry to hear of her nephew's death, but couldn't offer any assistance as her own situation was precarious. "I wasn't expecting help," Nora said as she folded the letter. "But it would have been nice to know there was somewhere we could go if needed." "You have somewhere," Samuel said, his voice quiet but firm. "Here." Before she could respond, Emma ran in, excited about fresh tracks she'd found in the melting snow. The moment passed, but Samuel's words stayed with Nora. As winter began to loosen its grip in March, Nora found herself dreading the thought of returning to the homestead. The children had thrived here at the ranch. Emma was reading confidently now, with Samuel's help. James had grown stronger, losing his frailty, and Sarah was talking more every day, her vocabulary expanding rapidly. And then there was Samuel himself. Somewhere along the way, his quiet presence had become essential to her happiness. She found herself watching for his smile, treasuring their evening conversations by the fire, noticing the way his hands moved as he worked or the deep timbre of his laugh when the children did something amusing. One unseasonably warm afternoon, Samuel suggested they picnic by the creek, which had thawed enough to run freely again. The children raced ahead, eager to be outside after the long confinement of winter. "Careful near the water," Nora called after them. "I'll watch them," Samuel assured her, carrying the basket she'd packed. They spread a blanket on a dry patch of ground, the sun warm enough to make the air almost spring-like. As the children explored nearby, always within sight, Samuel and Nora sat side by side, watching clouds drift across the blue sky. "I've been thinking," Samuel said after a comfortable silence, "about spring." Nora tensed slightly. "Yes. Your homestead will need work after the winter. The garden will need planting. The roof probably needs repairs." "Yes," she agreed, her heart sinking at the thought. "I could help," he offered. "Send some men over. Come myself when I can." Nora looked at him, struck by his profile against the sky, strong, steady, kind. "That's very generous." He turned to meet her gaze. "Or you could stay." Her breath caught. "Stay. Here. At the ranch." His eyes never left hers. "I know it hasn't been long since your husband passed. I know you're still grieving. But Nora." He paused, seeming to search for words. "These past months, with you and the children here, this place has felt like a home for the first time since I built it." "Samuel, I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give," he said quickly. "Just for you to stay. The children are happy here. You could have your own space, your own life. I wouldn't expect—" "Samuel," she interrupted gently, "what exactly are you proposing?" He took a deep breath. "A partnership, for now. Maybe more someday, if you ever felt that was possible." His voice dropped lower. "I care for you, Nora, and I love those children like they were my own." As if to underscore his words, a peal of laughter rang out. They both turned to see James on Samuel's shoulders, showing Emma how to skip stones across the creek's surface. Sarah sat nearby, contentedly arranging pebbles in patterns. "They love you too," Nora said softly. "It's clear in everything they do." "And you?" The question was barely audible. Nora looked at this man who had saved them in every way a person could be saved, who had asked for nothing in return, who had somehow rebuilt her broken heart piece by piece without her even noticing. "I think," she said carefully, "that I could love you very easily, Samuel Reed. In fact, I'm afraid I might already." The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her a gentle kiss, respectful but with a promise of deeper passion. When they parted, Emma's voice called out, "Mama, Mr. Samuel, look what I found." Samuel chuckled. "Duty calls." As they walked toward the children, he took her hand in his calloused fingers warm against hers. "Is that a yes? You'll stay?" Nora squeezed his hand. "Yes, we'll stay." That evening, after the children were in bed, Samuel found Nora on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I have something for you," he said, joining her. "Been saving it for the right moment." He handed her a small wooden box. Inside, nestled on a scrap of velvet, was a ring, a simple silver band set with a small pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Not fancy, but it's beautiful," Nora whispered, touched beyond words. "I want to be clear about what I'm asking," Samuel said, taking both her hands in his. "I'm asking you to be my wife, Nora. Not just to stay here, not just a partnership. I want us to be a family, you, me, Emma, James, and Sarah." Tears filled Nora's eyes. "It's too soon," she said, though her heart was already answering differently. "Thomas would want you and the children to be happy and safe," Samuel finished gently. "I'm not asking to replace him in your heart or in the children's memories. I'm asking for my own place alongside those memories." Nora looked up at this man who had come into their lives when they needed him most, who had asked for nothing and given everything. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you, Samuel." His arms came around her, strong and sure, and as they stood together under the vast Montana sky, Nora felt something she'd thought lost forever: hope for the future, and the certainty of being truly, deeply loved. The next morning, Nora wasn't sure how to tell the children, but Samuel seemed to have a plan. After breakfast, he gathered them in the main room. "Emma, James, Sarah," he began, his voice gentle but serious. "I need to ask you something important." The children looked at him with solemn faces, sensing the significance of the moment. "I've asked your mother to marry me," Samuel continued. "That means I would be your stepfather. We would all live here together as a family. But I wanted to make sure that's okay with you." Emma, ever the spokesperson, frowned thoughtfully. "Would we still visit Papa's grave?" "Of course," Samuel assured her. "Your father will always be your father. Nothing changes that." "Would you read to us every night?" James asked, practical as always. Samuel smiled. "Every night I'm here. And can I still help with the horses?" Emma pressed. "I'm counting on it," Samuel replied. Little Sarah, who had been watching the exchange with wide eyes, toddled over to Samuel and raised her arms to be picked up. "Sam Wel," she said clearly, one of her few distinct words. As he lifted her, she patted his bearded cheek with a small hand. "Stay," she declared. Samuel's eyes met Nora's over Sarah's head, and the love she saw there took her breath away. "Yes, little one," he said softly. "I'm staying. We're all staying. We're a family now." Emma and James exchanged glances. Then Emma nodded decisively. "I think it's a good idea," she announced. "Mama smiles more when you're around." Nora felt her cheeks warm at her daughter's perceptiveness, but Samuel just grinned. "That's what I want most in the world, for your mama to smile." They were married 2 weeks later in the Clearwater church, a simple ceremony with the children as their only attendants and a few townspeople as witnesses. Nora wore a dress of deep blue that Samuel had ordered from Helena, arriving just in time. Emma had flowers in her hair, James stood straight and proud in new boots, and Sarah scattered wildflower petals with enthusiastic abandon. "I, Samuel, take you, Nora, to be my lawfully wedded wife." Samuel's voice was steady and sure as he spoke his vows. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part. As Nora repeated the words, she felt Thomas's memory like a gentle presence, not a barrier but a blessing. He would have approved of Samuel. She thought, this steady, honorable man who had saved them in their darkest hour. "You may kiss the bride," the Reverend pronounced, and Samuel's lips met hers with a tenderness that held the promise of passion to come. "Mama, are you crying?" Emma asked as they walked out of the church. "Happy tears," Nora assured her, squeezing Samuel's hand. That night, after a small celebration at the ranch with neighbors and the children safely asleep, Nora stood nervously in the bedroom that would now be theirs. Samuel had given her time alone to prepare, his consideration touching her deeply. When he finally entered, his eyes found hers immediately. "Are you sure, Nora? We can wait if you need more time." She crossed to him, placing her hands on his chest. "I'm sure, Samuel. I want to be your wife in every way." His kiss was different this time, deeper, more urgent, and Nora responded with a passion that surprised them both. His hands were gentle but sure as they undressed each other, exploring with wonder and growing desire. Later, lying in his arms as moonlight streamed through the window, Nora felt a peace she hadn't known was possible again. "Happy," Samuel murmured against her hair. "Yes," she said simply. "Are you?" His arm tightened around her. "More than I ever thought I could be." Spring blossomed fully across the ranch, bringing new life everywhere. The garden Nora and Samuel planted together flourished. The livestock multiplied with new calves and foals, and the children thrived in the freedom of warmer days. One evening in late May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emma reading aloud to James while Sarah played with wooden blocks at their feet, Samuel turned to Nora with a thoughtful expression. "What is it?" she asked, recognizing the look that meant he was considering something important. "I was thinking about your homestead," he said. "The claim will lapse if it's abandoned too long." Nora tensed slightly. "Do you want us to go back?" "No," he said firmly. "Never. But I was thinking we could incorporate it into the ranch. Use the land, maybe fix up the cabin as a line shack for when I'm working that section." Relief washed over her. "I'd like that. It would mean Thomas's dream lives on, in a way." Samuel nodded. "And the children would still have that connection to their father." "You're a good man, Samuel Reed," Nora said softly, reaching for his hand. He brought her fingers to his lips. "Just a man who knows how lucky he is." As summer approached, Nora began to suspect what the slight changes in her body might mean. She waited until she was certain before telling Samuel, choosing a moment when they were alone, riding together to check on a distant pasture. They stopped by a creek, dismounting to let the horses drink. Samuel was pointing out where he thought they should build a new fence when Nora touched his arm. "Samuel," she said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion, "I have something to tell you." He turned to her immediately, concern in his eyes. "What is it?" "I'm going to have a baby," she said, watching his expression transform from concern to wonder. "Our baby." For a moment, he seemed unable to speak. Then he gathered her gently in his arms, burying his face in her hair. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." When he pulled back, Nora was startled to see tears in his eyes. "Are you happy?" she asked. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said, his voice rough with emotion. He placed a hand on her still flat stomach. "When?" "December, I think. A Christmas baby." His smile was radiant. "The children, I haven't told them yet. I wanted you to know first." Samuel kissed her then, pouring all his joy and love into the embrace. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For this second chance. For our family. For everything." The children's reactions to the news were predictably varied. Emma was excited about a new sibling, already planning all the things she would teach the baby. James was more reserved, asking practical questions about where the baby would sleep. And Sarah, not fully comprehending, simply patted Nora's stomach and declared, "Baby." As Nora's pregnancy progressed through the summer and into fall, Samuel's protectiveness increased proportionally. He insisted on hiring more help for the ranch so he could be closer to home, and he took over many of Nora's heavier chores despite her protests. "I'm pregnant, not an invalid," she reminded him one afternoon as he refused to let her carry a basket of laundry. "Humor me," he said, stealing a kiss as he took the basket. "I missed this the first time around, let me fuss a little." His words reminded her that while she had experienced pregnancy and childbirth before, this was all new to Samuel. His wonder at each development the first time he felt the baby kick, the visible changes in her body touched her deeply. One October evening, as they sat by the fire, Samuel carving a cradle while Nora knitted a blanket for the baby, Emma looked up from her book with a serious expression. "Will the baby have Papa's name or yours?" she asked suddenly. Samuel's hands stilled on his work. "That's a good question, Emma. What do you think?" The girl considered this. "I think the baby should have your name, since you're its father. But I still want to keep Papa's name." "Of course you will," Samuel assured her. "Your name is part of who you are, part of your connection to your father." "But we're still a family, right?" James asked, looking up from the checkerboard where he was playing against himself. "Even with different names?" "Absolutely," Samuel said firmly. "Names are just words. Family is about love, about taking care of each other. Like you take care of us," Emma said matter-of-factly. Samuel's eyes met Nora's over the children's heads. "Yes," he said softly, "exactly like that." The first snow fell in early November, earlier than usual, blanketing the ranch in white. The baby had been active all day, kicking and shifting as if responding to the changing weather. "I think this one's going to be as restless as you," Nora told Samuel as they prepared for bed, his hand resting on her rounded belly to feel the movement. "Poor child, having me for a father," he joked, but Nora heard the underlying uncertainty. "You're already a wonderful father," she said, placing her hand over his. "Emma, James, and Sarah adore you. This little one will too." His expression softened. "I never thought I'd have this, Nora. Family. Children." He kissed her gently. "You, nor I after Thomas died," she admitted. "I thought that part of my life was over. And now," she smiled, guiding his hand to where the baby was kicking strongly. "Now I know it was just beginning." December arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow, keeping them close to the ranch house. As Nora's time grew near, Samuel arranged for the doctor from Clearwater to stay at the ranch, unwilling to risk her being unable to get help when needed. On the night of December 15th, as a blizzard howled outside, Nora's labor began. Samuel stayed with her through the early hours, holding her hand, wiping her brow, his steady presence a comfort as the pains increased. "The children," she gasped between contractions. "With Mrs. Parker in the sitting room," he assured her, referring to their housekeeper who had returned in the fall. "They're fine." As the labor intensified, the doctor insisted Samuel leave, but Nora gripped his hand. "Stay," she pleaded. "I need you." The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "Stay by her head, Mr. Reed." Through the long, difficult hours that followed, Samuel never left her side, his voice a constant anchor, his strength sustaining her when her own faltered. "You can do this, Nora," he murmured as she struggled through the final stages. "You're the strongest woman I know." With a last, tremendous effort, Nora brought their child into the world. The baby's cry, strong and indignant, filled the room, and the doctor's voice came from what seemed a great distance. "A boy, Mrs. Reed. A fine, healthy boy." Samuel's face, when she could focus on it again, was transformed with awe as the doctor placed the swaddled infant in his arms. "Nora," he whispered, his voice breaking, "look what we made." He placed the baby gently in her arms, and Nora gazed down at their son, red-faced and perfect, with a shock of dark hair like his father's. "He's beautiful," she breathed, touching one tiny fist that immediately closed around her finger. "What shall we call him?" Samuel asked, sitting beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders. Nora had been thinking about this for months. "Thomas Samuel Reed," she said, watching his face, "to honor both the fathers my children have known." Tears filled Samuel's eyes. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely sure," she said, leaning into his embrace as they both gazed at their newborn son. A soft knock at the door preceded Emma's anxious face peering in. "Mama, can we see the baby?" At the doctor's nod, Samuel motioned the children in. They approached the bed cautiously, Emma curious, James solemn, Sarah clinging to Emma's hand. "This is your brother," Nora said softly. "Thomas Samuel Reed." "He's so small," James observed. "He'll grow," Samuel assured him. "Before you know it, he'll be running after you, wanting to do everything you do." "Can I hold him?" Emma asked. With Samuel's help, Emma sat carefully in a chair while Nora placed the baby in her arms, showing her how to support his head. "Hello, Thomas," Emma whispered. "I'm your big sister." As Nora watched her children, all four of them now, a wave of gratitude washed over her. How different this might have been. How easily their story could have ended in tragedy rather than joy. Samuel seemed to read her thoughts, his arm tightening around her. "We made it," he murmured for her ears alone. "Yes," she agreed, turning to meet his gaze. "We did." Later, when the children had been ushered out and the doctor had gone to rest, Samuel stretched out beside Nora on the bed, the baby sleeping peacefully between them. "I love you," he said simply, reaching across to touch her cheek. "More than I ever thought possible." Nora turned her face to kiss his palm. "And I love you, for saving us, for believing in us, for making us a family again." "We saved each other," Samuel corrected gently. "And we're more than a family, Nora. We're home." As the blizzard continued outside, the Reed family slept peacefully together, safe in the warmth of the home they had built, not just the physical structure, but the bonds of love and trust that had grown between them through hardship and joy. Spring came early the following year, as if nature itself was celebrating with them. On a warm April day, they rode together to the hillside where Thomas Miller and Nora's parents were buried. Emma, now 7, laid wildflowers on her father's grave while Samuel stood respectfully back, baby Thomas in his arms. "I think Papa would be happy," Emma said as they prepared to leave. "Don't you, Mama?" Nora looked from her daughter to Samuel, who was pointing out something to James while Sarah picked flowers nearby. The love that filled her heart in that moment seemed too vast to contain. "Yes, Emma," she said softly. "I think he would be very happy indeed." As they rode back to the ranch, their ranch now, their home, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the depths of grief and despair to this new life filled with love and hope. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked, riding beside her with baby Thomas securely held against his chest. Nora smiled, watching Emma and James race ahead while Sarah rode in front of Samuel, chattering happily about the birds they passed. "I'm thinking about the day you came to our cabin after the funeral," she said. "How scared I was. How alone I felt." Samuel's expression softened with memory. "I was scared too. Scared you'd turn me away. Scared I wouldn't be able to help." "You did more than help," Nora said, her voice full of emotion. You saved us. You made us a family again. We're a family now, Samuel agreed, reaching across to take her hand. And we always will be. As they crested the hill and the ranch came into view, their future spread before them like a promise. Nora knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. This family forged in hardship and bound by love stronger than any storm the frontier could bring.